So I'll be speaking. Let me set a timer. I'll try to keep it tight, under 20 minutes or right around 20 minutes. And I'll be speaking about fostering resilience among immigrant and refugee youth. And funding for some of the work today comes from a small grant that I received from the Thrasher Research Fund and a larger SAMHSA NCTSN Category 2 Treatment Development Grant, who the PI is Dr. Heidi Ellis, who's the director of our center. So supporting refugee and immigrant communities and engaging in mental health services for refugee and immigrant youth within schools is a team effort. It's a team sport. And I'm only able to be here today because of the work and dedication of the people on my team and all the people who've come before me and all of the amazing communities and stakeholders that we have the privilege of working with. This is our core team at Boston Children's Hospital. That's me with a goofy grin in the back. And then I find it really helpful and important for me to do a little bit of framing before talking about some of this content. So this is some things I know and some things I don't know. So I know about some of the research and clinical recommendations in this area, broadly defined as mental health service provision for refugee and immigrant youth who have resettled in the United States or North America. I know that our social and cultural identities, our histories, our contexts deeply shape our lives and our experiences. And I know that by growing up in the world, no matter where you grow up, we all have very complicated networks and constellations of biases and prejudices and assumptions built into our minds and the systems that we inhabit, schools, universities, hospitals, even if we wish they weren't there. What I don't know is I don't know about all socio-cultural groups. I don't know about you as a person listening to my voice right now or seeing my face, your specific experiences with this work, your own lived histories and how they shape your thinking and actions, what prompted you to be here today. I don't have all the answers for how to best serve and support youth of diverse backgrounds. And even though I don't know a lot more than I do know, the values of social justice, equity, human rights really drive me to continue to participate and continue to fail and continue to try to help in this space. The other important thing to name is the dialectic of my own positionality in this moment as a person with many privileged and observably dominant identities. I can try to use my relative power and unearned privileges to influence equity-oriented actions, things that facilitate equity and justice and system change. And part of that involves stepping forward. So right now I'm presenting, so that's stepping forward. And it also really involves stepping back and allowing communities and youth voices and other individuals to step forward and help make change collaboratively. Then potential cons is I perpetuate a role of white men in positions of authority, perpetuate something called the white savior industrial complex. And so this is a tension that I hold in my work in refugee and immigrant work. That bottom image is Sankofa, it's a Ghanaian symbol thinking about how do we look back to move forward. And so part of that is embedded within these social justice principles. That's at least what I'm striving for. So in our group, we use the refugee and immigrant core stressors framework, which is a four component model for understanding and conceptualizing some of the challenges commonly faced by refugee and immigrant communities. Often for refugee and immigrant service providers or educators who are working with individuals of refugee and immigrant backgrounds, it can be hard to organize or structure how to move forward. And so this model, which was developed originally a number of years ago, really helps anchor some of the common challenges that youth and families face. And these are really understood as resettlement stress. That's in the bottom purple. These are the challenges of basic needs, financial stresses, job stability, consistent healthcare, and then legal status. Refugee and immigrant process can take lots of different steps in terms of how people come to a country or a culture and sort of what legal pieces are involved. As Laura was talking about earlier, the challenges for youth who are undocumented, there may be different challenges than for folks who come through a formal, for example, United Nations refugee resettlement mechanism. Acculturation stress, which are challenges in navigating family relationships and resettlement, learning a new language in a culture, and navigating some of the cultural nuances and cultural norms of a new school. for many kids from refugee and immigrant backgrounds. For example, many of the youth who are coming up from Central America to the southern border have significantly disrupted educational experiences, and so then adapting, acculturating to a school system itself can be incredibly challenging. Third is isolation stressors. That's in that bottom left in the red. Challenges of discrimination, marginalization, social alienation, thwarted social belongingness, and loneliness. In some communities, there may be youth, there are not many other youth of that refugee or immigrant background. And so trying to connect with that community can be really challenging. And then traumatic stress. And this, when we think about trauma for refugee and immigrant youth, we often need to be thinking about both pre-migration, migration, and then resettlement, and the understandable challenges that can occur when youth and families are facing incredibly difficult circumstances. And no new information for the folks on this call that the COVID-19 epidemic has amplified, exacerbated all of these challenges for many folks, at least in the United States. And one way of conceptualizing this is the view of multiple epidemics, insofar as pandemics follow the fault lines of a society, exposing and often magnifying the power inequities that already shape the population. And so we can think of this as the COVID-19 crisis interacting with the structural racism, bias, and equity, anti-immigrant sentiments that exist. And these create syndemic conditions insofar as two epidemics interacting together that can increase greater morbidity and mortality for marginalized populations. And so that conceptualization for me has been both painful and helpful for trying to understand what's been happening. So let me provide a case example for how mental health services for youth often unfold in the United States, not always, but sometimes, and then ways we want to try to change it. So imagine a 15-year-old boy, Syrian boy Mustafa, and his mother are in the waiting room at a hospital-based mental health clinic. They're refugees who resettled in the United States who fled war and conflict in Syria. An English-speaking clinician calls them into an office with a hospital interpreter and begins to explain the process of consent and confidentiality. Before the interpreter finishes the explanation, the mom hands a piece of paper to the interpreter and speaks at length in Arabic. The interpreter turns back to the clinician with a worried look on his face and says, "She says her son isn't crazy and doesn't need to see you. She wants you to sign this paper so he can go back to school. The school says he can't return until you do so." The paper in the front of the clinician asks for verification that the clinician has fully assessed Mustafa for mental health problems and that he is safe and ready to return to school. So there's a lot of pieces here, but the key idea that we're trying to communicate in this case example, and this is a composite example from lots of different cases that we've worked on or contributed to or consulted on in our program, is that for some refugee and immigrant families, mental health services may be seen as useless at best. So that's useless at best, and damaging and toxic to their family and community at worst. So if we take a trauma-informed lens for folks maybe aren't engaging mental health services or aren't returning phone calls, it's not that parents or caregivers or youth don't want to build lives of meaning and purpose. It's that based on their histories and experiences, they may not see value and may see harm in engaging in a mental health service context, which can be hard if you're coming out of psychology grad school and eager to help and trying to figure out how can we really open the door for those services. And that's really what a lot of our work is in our program at the Trauma and Community Resilience Center, is about how do we open the door for mental health services in ways that feel really culturally responsive and trauma informed. So part of the reason why folks may not engage in mental health services because of 4 common barriers. That's distrust of authority, linguistic and cultural barriers, stigma of mental health services, and then the primacy of resettlement stressors. And then wherever you are in the world, whether or not you're doing a formal trauma systems therapy or not, you can try to think in your program, how can I navigate these barriers through community engagement, true community partnership, partnering with cultural experts and cultural brokers from and within the community who are experts in the language and the culture, embedding services in service systems, so embedding systems within schools as opposed to standalone clinics separately, and then integration of concrete services, making it really clear why services help families. And so using a socio-ecological model, trauma systems therapy for refugees, it's an intervention model we work on at Boston Children's, is really focused on both social environmental interventions and self-regulation interventions for kids and families. And if folks are, I'm going to move through some slides now quickly. I'll share this, our version of these slides with folks so you have them. So really, we've got to think about the full ecology, all these barriers, all these common core stressors if we want to build mental health services within schools, within communities that can be sustainable and helpful. Because we need to really think about both kids who are exposed to trauma, who experience survival in the moment states, and we need to be attending to the social environment and the system, both caregivers, schools, communities, neighborhoods, ability to support that youth or family navigate those survival in the moment states. Survival in the moment meaning a traumatic stress situation. And thinking about this is really what trauma systems therapy is, which is a psychosocial and organizational model developed by Heidi Ellis and others. And that trauma systems therapy for refugees is really a cultural adaptation to try to open the door for services. So TST is a clinical model and an organizational model. And our colleagues at NYU sort of hold the base of TST. And then trauma systems therapy, you see some animations, is a public health sort of based model that includes multiple tiers. So often psychotherapy is, a lot of psychotherapy models are really just this top tier, maybe school-based counseling or outpatient services and home-based care, those top two tiers in the purple. Really what TSTR and some of the great innovations in this model are building school-based or community-based, skills-based groups that are non-stigmatizing, that really focus on increasing belongingness and decreasing stigma and decreasing culture of stress, and engaging in true community engagement using strategies from community-based participatory action research, trying to understand what are the challenges of community and responding, as opposed to just coming in as an outsider, parachuting in saying, hey, you need to use the service. And then across all of that work, doing deep cultural brokering, partnering with cultural experts to dyadically deliver a lot of services. So if I want to engage with a particular community that I may not have linguistic or cultural expertise on, I may know about clinical psychology, know about treating trauma, but really that's only a part of the constellation in order to be truly effective, affirming, and supportive. And that's the work that we do at Boston Children's. And so in the last 5 minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about a piece of the model that we've pulled out and trying to work on with schools. And these we call the tier 2 skills-based groups, because within that model, they fit within that second tier. And so you can think about this model as really designed to reduce barriers to care. So there's the intensive interventions, sort of outpatient, school-based, home-based psychotherapy. And then there's really the school and community-based skill building, which is a very big piece. And that in theory, if working well, then can help refer kids who need it to higher levels of care. So this is a quick photo of myself and a great group of colleagues in the Boston area that we've worked over the past year and a half to provide tier 2 groups for youth coming from Central America, from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and then delivering these services within communities. So this is a group that was working at Somerville High School, and then a group based at Mass General Chelsea. And as a group, we work to adapt a tier 2 intervention manual for adolescent youth. The manual is in English, but it's delivered by Spanish-speaking clinicians and cultural brokers, all in Spanish. And it was delivered in a combination of both telehealth and in-person format. And really, the group is designed to increase foundational psychological skills, increase subjective social belongingness, felt sense of community and connection, which is such a common challenge for youth of immigrant backgrounds, and increase gateway opportunities and resource mapping for further services as needed. It's also built to decrease a culture of stress, so through cultural learning and validation and collaboration, and then decrease the stigma of mental health services. So that way, engaging in some amount of preventive mental health services is much easier. People can take that in, metabolize it much more easily. And then if people need to refer to something else, it's a much easier handoff or warm handoff if people already have some positive connection. And so if you remember the example earlier, one of our goals in TSTR is to try to shape some of people's experiences from that first vignette to something more like this second vignette. So this would be if we were able to build some TSTR or refugee-ready mental health services into a school. So the mother of a 15-year-old Syrian boy, Mustafa, arrives at school to pick up her son, who stayed after to attend a skills group for teens of immigrant backgrounds. As the group emerges from the meeting, laughing and chatting, a Syrian woman who co-leads the group waves the mother over. They exchange a greeting and pleasantries, catching up briefly about their families and community news. The group co-leader then asks the mother if she has a few minutes to chat privately. The group co-leader describes that the boy's positive progress in the group and the skills that he's learning, and also shares that he's continuing to have trouble in the classroom, became upset earlier, knocking over a desk. The co-leader then shares that she's spoken with the teacher, who was worried, and wondered if they could meet together with the mother and the group's other co-leader, a school social worker, to discuss how to help Mustafa succeed in the classroom. The co-leader added that she knows the mother was managing a lot at home, and it could be a great opportunity to talk about how they could support those needs as well. The mother nodded in agreement, and a meeting was set for later that week. And so again, all of the potential barriers or some of the challenges that I've talked about today are woven into this potential vignette. Again, this is a composite of multiple cases. If we're able to build trauma-informed, culturally responsive, really affirming services, so building lives of meaning and purpose doesn't feel like this scary thing that we have to go somewhere to do. It's already here within us if we can work collaboratively together to find it. And in the last minute or so, what are some tools that you all can start using now? You may be saying, well, I'm a teacher in this program. We're not doing trauma systems therapy for refugees, or I'm the only person in my school who's doing this. How can I start? A few tools I'd like to bring your attention to. One is and this is in Laura's recommended reading, the Refugee and Immigrant Core Stressors Toolkit. This is an online assessment tool that you can think about the 4 core stressors. You can find it on our website on a blue button directly above my head. This is a direct link, and if you Google Core Stressors Toolkit, you can find it online. It's been accessed by providers and educators throughout the United States and around the globe, actually. I think Antarctica is the only continent that has not engaged in it. So if you're in Antarctica, feel free to use it and let me know. It's pretty simple. We're in the process of we'll be updating it over the next couple of years. One thing we'll be doing in the coming years is making a Spanish language version, just so folks can try to utilize this tool to think about the core stressors and apply it to both individual kids you're working with and thinking about refugee and immigrant trauma and resilience more broadly. Another recommendation is a comprehensive assessment battery. So sometimes if you're an educator or a school psychologist or a principal working in a nonprofit, you may be thinking about, well, what kind of measures should we use before and after an intervention? Or we want to assess the need for a potential grant, or we want to set up data to advocate to our congressperson. This is a list of potential self-report measures that have been tested with different refugee and immigrant populations that you may consider using in those projects. And we helped contribute to this tool. This is on the NCTSN web pages. Another tool that we worked on in our group in collaboration with colleagues from Boston College and a number of other primarily New England-based refugee and immigrant researchers, policymakers, stakeholders, is a tool called Restructuring for Resilience. And this is a toolkit for reshaping negative narratives about refugees living in the United States. Basically, we broke down a tool thinking about what are common narratives that people may experience in their work environment, at the kitchen table, at the lunch line, at the bus stop, and how to try to shape that both in these informal ways and then language that you can use potentially in paper writing, grant writing, communication, so that way we can use affirming, empowering language. And finally, some additional resources that I've also found personally helpful and that our group also likes to reference. Resources from the UNHCR, the U.S. Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit. This is an excellent toolkit if people haven't accessed it. Lots of great resources. International Rescue Committee, Switchboard TA, which is a technical assistance website, NCTSN, which we are a partner in, and then multiculturalpsychology.com. That's a small website that I run that has content for educators and mental health providers trying to do social justice-based work. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. It's my email at the bottom, jeffrey.winter@children's.harvard.edu. And thanks so much for the opportunity to present. And I apologize for showing the presenter view for the first few minutes of the presentation. Thanks.